Have you thought this through?
No way will that work.
Are you sure? Is there any money in that?
You'll never make any money doing that. How are you going to pay the mortgage? Just get a job.
You're going to try to sell that? Why can't you be normal like everybody else?
Oh, boy. Were your parents morons too?
The savvy entrepreneur to the rescue.
Congratulations. That really turned out well.
Really good job.
I'm going to admit it. I'm surprised.
You know, I wish I thought of that.
I never thought anyone would. How did you do that?
I'm so glad you're pursuing your dream. I wish I had the courage to follow my dreams.
Hello, all you entrepreneurs out there. Welcome to the Savvy Entrepreneur. We're broadcasting on WLCB 101.5 FM, and I'm your host, Doris Nagel. I'm happy you've joined me. You're probably wondering what the Savvy Entrepreneur is all about. Each week, I host guests from all facets of entrepreneurship who come on the show to share their stories or to talk about some of the lessons they've learned over the years or some of the resources that are out there and common questions that entrepreneurs have. Why am I doing this? Well, because I have seen and made a lot of mistakes over the years. I've counseled small businesses and startups over the past 30 plus years, and I've also started or helped start 9 different businesses of my own. And I've not only seen mistakes, but I myself have made a lot of them. So my hope is to inspire all you entrepreneurs out there and maybe help make your journey just a little bit easier. So I promised you that every week we have a guest. And at this point, I'd like to introduce our guest for today. Joining me by phone is Sue Reardon. Now, she's the co-founder and what she calls the community connector at a company called Suite Spotte LLC. And she spells that S-U-I-T-E, Suite Spotte, because it's a member-focused co-working shared office community. Sue says she's a serial entrepreneur, self-professed. Sounds familiar, Sue? She's a published author and a small business advocate. She helps people be the best they can, and that's a common theme throughout her personal and professional life. A change addict with a love for learning, her career started with a corporate role in the financial services industry. Then the entrepreneurial bug found her when she became one of the partners who grew a private technology consulting firm into a global public enterprise. That was followed by an emerging artist gallery and a midday cafe. Her book, which is called Rock a Million, a manifesto for the gutsy entrepreneur, is her call to action for small business owners to take a more collaborative approach in running their business. And today, as the co-founder and community connector at Suite Spotte, which is a co-working community, she carries that message forward. As I mentioned, Suite Spotte is a shared office co-worker community. It's comprised of small business owners and remote workers from the Chicago suburbs, specifically the western Chicago suburbs. And whether participating virtually or physically, Suite Spotte members are energized by the collective, productive, collaborative, and resourceful member community. It sounds like a phenomenal place, Sue. I can't wait to learn more. Thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Doris.
Yeah, so I think the place to start is just to talk a little bit more about your business. What exactly does Suite Spotte do, and what are the services you offer, and what makes you unique?
Sure. Thank you. Well, when most people think of co-working, they think about that shared office space, so the physical space, access to a desk or a private office or to meeting rooms by the hour. But while we do have 2 physical shared offices, one in LaGrange and one in Forest Park, Illinois, Suite Spotte is really more about the culture that connects the small business owners and remote workers into a far more supportive member community. So it's that community, the member community, that encourages all the sharing of ideas and resources and learning. So access to the community is virtual through regularly scheduled times for connection and different types of learning opportunities And we use different video conferencing tools like Zoom or GoToMeeting and such. And also physically, where the members come together at this flexible shared office workspaces.
I have to admit that sounds intriguing because, I've never actually rented space in a shared office complex, but I've obviously, like most of us, I've been to meetings, gone to visit other people who have spaces they've shared. And, there might be a little hi, how you doing chit chat in the coffee break room, but most of them are pretty cold places. How do you make sure that yours is a much more vibrant, interactive, collaborative kind of place?
Well, we do it through many different ways. We encourage people, certainly by introducing and connecting new people that come to Suite Spotte, and really put an emphasis on those relationships. So when we bring people into the organization, they're really looking at it and understand that it's important that they be part of and participate in the community itself. We're about helping members grow, and we're about celebrating and commiserating and sharing successes and encouragement. So there's an energy in the space. And it's very apparent. I mean, we hear about it all the time. So that energy makes people comfortable and makes people want to be part of that group, whether it's participating in planned, structured events or just serendipitously, where they're just turning to another person and saying, hey, I've got an issue with a client. Can I run this past you? Or do you know a tool that will help me do this or do that? And it's very open and very shared and very friendly environment.
It sounds like a great place. A lot more engaging than a lot of the shared office complexes I've visited. I'm curious what you attribute that to, though. How do you, is it start with the selection process or the onboarding process? I think there's just a natural tendency for most of these places where people just kind of go to their little space and they hunker down, they do their thing, and then they leave, and maybe they say hello, they chit-chat for a minute with somebody, but that's about it. I'm still just curious, how do you change that paradigm?
Well, one of the things we do is what we call the weekly hot seat, and that's a member-driven meeting that happens at 12 noon every Friday. And when we were in the space, anybody that's at the space can come in and they brown bag their lunch, and we are able to share ideas and identify an individual in the group who is put on the hot seat, essentially. And again, this is member driven, so they're really running it. It's not something that Suite Spotte is facilitating, if you will. So they really enjoy getting to know each other. And when that person's on the hot seat, they're able to present a problem that they're having, a concern that they have about a particular issue, or maybe they just want to share an idea and get some feedback on what other people think about it. Is it a viable idea? And how do they take it to the next level?
So do people volunteer to be on the hot seat, or is this something that it's like the finger of fate that just sort of picks you?
Sometimes, yeah, Doris, sometimes. How it's usually done is it's kind of interesting. One of our members who has an app on their phone, and everybody gets a number that's at the table or on the phone line or on the video line, because it's done even today. It's done remotely as well. Right. You can participate. So they get on and everybody gets their number and they spin. It's almost like just spinning the dial. And if your number comes up, you're on the hot seat.
Oh my.
Yeah.
That reminds me of law school where
a little bit.
They call it the Socratic method, where your professor would call on you and just grill you. But it sounds much more collaborative than that.
It is.
But I'm still curious. There must be maybe the fact that people know that there's this expectation might self-select or deselect certain kinds of people and businesses from your community. Do you think that's the case?
Absolutely. You are so right. Anybody that's going to join Suite Spotte books a tour. And when they book a tour, I meet with them. And it's at that point that I begin to determine whether or not they're there for the community. I mean, a lot of people are working from home and really struggling with the isolation that happens with that. You know, they're by themselves. They get lonely.
Oh, yeah. It's a lonely journey, even when you're with other people, right?
Exactly. So they're looking for some camaraderie, some way of gathering additional input to what they're trying to achieve. In addition to that, working from home can be very distracting. They don't always focus on what they should be doing. So they're looking to be motivated as well and to really increase their productivity. So when I'm there during that tour, while I'm showing them the space and talking about our memberships and events and what we do and what we're really all about and what our values are, I'm also determining whether or not, are they just looking for an affordable desk? And that's really, they're there for the space. Or are they there for the community? And that kind of begins to tell me whether or not this person's going to fit in. And if they, we also have prior to that, if they decide, or after the tour, if they decide, hey, I want to go forward with it, they fill out a very brief membership app. And it really does ask them, what are they proud of? What are they trying to accomplish? How can we help them? That type of thing. And that app's very brief, but it's insightful. I mean, we get a pretty good idea whether they're going to fit in or not. And, I after 6 years, I got pretty good at this. And, you know the people. And if they're not going to fit in, I just basically, I'm very straightforward and honest with them and let them know, that's not what we're about. And there are other places that are more suited to what you're looking for.
I think you just answered what was going to be my next question, which is, have you ever had to tell someone, I just don't think you'd be a great fit here?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And, well, I look at it as 5 minutes of that uncomfortable conversation, or the other choice is I bring them on and negatively impact the other members in the community. So I have to put the community first. I have to put the members first. So it works out. And you know what? They wouldn't be happy. Anybody that has come on and, I probably shouldn't have really approved their membership. When they came on, they do self-select. You mentioned that earlier. They do say, hey, this isn't what I'm really looking for.
Yeah.
We don't force people, Doris, to participate. They just do. They want to. That's why they're there.
Well, it'll be interesting to see, as we'll talk about this in a little bit, about how you're growing the business and plans to grow the business. But it's an interesting kind of dilemma in terms of scaling of how do you take the Sue Reardon antenna and make it something that anybody can use, right? Or maybe somebody with a little bit of training. That's probably a bit of a challenge to figure out how best to do that, but I'm sure you're wrestling with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I do have community hosts at each location, and they are pretty much trained on, okay, what are we looking for? And they're at the point where they know when they meet with someone whether or not this is the right place for them.
Interesting. So talk a little bit about your business model. You said it's member focused. Is this a monthly? Is there a minimum commitment? What other kinds of services are included? Can the members vote somebody off the island if they don't think they're contributing?
We don't go that far. Like I said, the members, the people self-select. They realize that this isn't the place for them. Or I talk to them about it. If somebody's being really disruptive, they hear about it. We also, as part of the onboarding, Doris, we have a document that's called Keeping It Sweet at Suite Spotte. And it's very frank and it's very to the point, and it talks about, hey, we're here together and everybody is trying to achieve their individual goals, and we're doing that collectively. So that means that when it comes right down to it, it's about respect. It's about respect for the fellow members. You don't put yourself above anyone else. And that's critical. It talks about no pitching, no poaching. So you don't go in and say, okay, I'm going to be here for a month and I'm going to get my business card and pitch my business to every single person that's here. It's just not allowed.
And then I'm going to some other place and do the same thing, hoping that if I just throw enough things up on the wall, it'll stick. Huh?
That's exactly what happens. I mean, sometimes that's, I can see that when they, there's some signals when you're first talking with the person, if that's what they're looking to do. So I'm very clear that even in the tour and talking about no pitching, no poaching. You can't poach clients. You simply can't. That's not what it's about. There's confidentiality. And I flat out tell them, your membership's gone if that happens.
So talk a little bit about the membership
Sure.
and how that works.
Yeah, they come in. Their membership is month to month. The whole point is for flexibility and affordability and based on their needs. So it's a month to month. They pay the first of the month for that month, and it's based on what they determine they need, whether they're just looking for an occasional shared desk and being there a couple of times a week, or they're looking for a private office or a team suite for a group of people. And we have a few team suites where small businesses have come in and they have, 4 or 5 people as part of their team. And so they have that private team suite, but they also have access to the community. So with that membership, they have access to the community itself, certainly the hot seat meetings, any events that we have. They have access to what we've recently rolled out that's called Spot On Learning. And Spot On Learning is both virtual and live, in person, events that are learning opportunities that address specific practical tips and advice. And they're being facilitated by people who know what they're talking about. So experts in the field.
Interesting.
And those experts in the field are often members. Okay. So we do draw from our member community in order to help each other and put on these events. Or we go to third party and go out and bring in people depending on the topic. People have, because it's month to month, most memberships have a 30-day out. So the cancellation policy, they just say, at the beginning of July, I'm not going to renew for whatever reason, whether they're moving, which we've had a lot of, or they are changing, modifying their membership. The beauty of this is because there's so much support, we've had some pretty significant success stories with our members. And, we call them sweet success. And I've had people that through the hot seat have come together and helped to solve problems. I've had ideas and products launched out of those discussions, new products launched. I have members that have been here for almost since day one.
Well, I was going to ask you about the length of time that a lot of the tenants have been there.
Well, the members have been there, a lot of them, for multiple years. And I do have some that have been there from the beginning. And they've changed greatly. I have one is Steve Ryan from Rytech, a digital marketing firm. Steve came in a couple of weeks after we opened our doors in LaGrange, and it was just Steve. Rytech was Steve. And he was providing services, digital marketing services for clients. And he was, interested in growing and building the business. So fast forward today, Steve has 15 plus employees on his team. He's located in 3 different offices, different states as well. So he's in Washington, D.C., downtown Chicago, Milwaukee. I mean, and if you talk to Steve Doris, he will tell you one of the smartest things he did was to join Suite Spotte.
Sounds like a great guest for the show.
Yeah, there you go. He is actually really good.
We should talk about your Spot on Learning, because actually one of the things that I've been thinking about doing, just from the sheer number of phenomenal guests on the show, is to create something almost like a startup academy or something. I don't know, but we should definitely talk about that offline to see if there's any kind of overlap, anything that we can do to help each other there.
Doris, I'm very open to that. Anything that helps our members. Our members go from moonlighters to startup companies to companies that have been in business quite a while and are just, part of the gig economy or, digital nomads.
Yeah.
So, don't have big teams. They're not corporate, but they really grow.
So how do you find most of your clients, Sue?
Well, I mentioned Steve earlier. I use our members. I have great access to some pretty incredible people. And I noticed that early on. These businesses, they're sharp. They know what they're doing. And so if I can hire services from my member community, I do it. And that's what I've done to grow Suite Spotte. I've hired social media work. I've hired search engine SEO optimization. Most people will Google to find a co-working business near them, and we come up. And a big reason why we come up is that we're one of the few co-working businesses that are in the suburb that serve the suburban community.
That seems strange to me, given there's a lot of people who have lost their jobs in corporations in the suburbs, and because of that, or just because they have finally decided to take the plunge, there's probably just as many gig economy, entrepreneur, small business startup people in the suburbs as there are in the city, right?
Well, it seems to be that way. That's one of the reasons why I opened Suite Spotte. I was I had a business coaching firm and was meeting with clients and doing everything that everybody struggles with when you're on your own and meeting in coffee shops, libraries. Never brought people into my home, but found myself going into the city all the time in downtown Chicago because that's the only place where co-working existed. And so I said, what is going on here? And so came back and decided, there's a need here. There's a real need. They're smaller. It's a different business model because when you're talking about the city, you've got a lot of density. Here in the suburbs, you have more people that are established, that have small families, young families, that kind of know each other. So it's almost, in some respects, a neighborhood idea. People from the neighborhood working together. A lot of the kids go to similar schools or the same schools. A lot of them participate in local community events. So there's a different tone, and it's a great way to be able to focus on that whole idea of community as opposed to space.
It's interesting. I think I have felt that more in the western suburbs of Chicago because the neighborhoods are, I think, more well established. I'd be interested in your take on it, that being up here in Lake County, I sense a fair bit less of that, only because I think the suburbs are still a lot of new suburban development, what I call made-up communities, towns that didn't exist, don't have a main street. And I think that affects the sense of community, or might.
Well, it does if you're talking about it just being a community that is dependent on physical space. When we started Suite Spotte, opened in downtown LaGrange, opened in 2 years later in downtown Forest Park. So those are main street locations. So there's a lot of activity. A lot of people come into the downtown area. But if you're talking about building a community of people that, are within a 3-5 mile radius that depend on the physical space, that's one thing. But if you're talking about people that are looking for the same thing and you can do it virtually, it's a whole different story. You can broaden what your offerings are and what your membership looks like. And what that does, by doing that, you're able to enrich the membership for your current members.
Interesting. Well, talk a little bit about how you got started in this business. You alluded to the fact that you were going downtown and you saw a coworker space, but there just wasn't anything in the suburbs. But, lots of people have a little light bulb that goes on, right? But most of us don't do anything about it. Or if we do, it doesn't ever become a successful business. Talk about your journey from that light bulb moment to where you are now.
Sure. It was, for us, it was like the perfect storm. I had been myself dealing with, where do I meet with my clients and how do I get motivated? And I would meet with my clients. It would be, in the coffee shop, and you're competing with not looking like you're taking up space, and you're really putting on those airs of nursing that cup of coffee.
Right. Looking at that phone, signaling to people you got important stuff going on.
Yeah, and everybody does it. But you're also, so you're having an important meeting, growing your business with your customers, and there's a Grateful Dead ringtone going off in the back, or a crying baby. And right. You're like, how do I, it just doesn't jive. So that was part of it. I was personally frustrated with it. Not having that professional meeting room, place to do it. And I was lonely. I really felt isolated. And if I had new ideas, I was supposed to be helping the clients move forward, not asking them what they thought about things. So it really was about, I had a need. And then right at the same time, I was also doing research for my book, Rock a Million. And that book was about the sharing economy. And it really was about how can our country that has 30 million businesses at the time, small businesses, and 75% of them are really small, called micro businesses, under 5 employees, and how 10% of them ever hit $1 million in revenue. And I think about, all the talk about small businesses being the backbone and Main Street businesses, it's so critical, and they're the ones that provide all employment and such. And yet, these business owners aren't making a whole heck of a lot of money.
Right.
And, part of it came into play that people need to work together, that the collaboration was critical to helping people pull each other up. And, rather than trying to be a party of one, to bring together people, play to your strengths, and bring people together that have other strengths that could be of value to someone else.
Well, it almost sounds like an incubator model in some ways, more than just a shared office space.
And it could be considered an incubator model in some respects, because they do get the learning, they do get guidance. We don't have funding that's tied into it. We don't have, VCs coming in, or it's not a niched business. So it's not just for a certain industry. Our industries run the gamut. And I think that's what makes it more stimulating, because people don't realize how many great ideas come out of the experience of people in a completely different industry.
That is fantastic. Well, I'm going to ask you to hold your thoughts for just a second. We need to take a quick break for station identification and a word from a few of our sponsors. But we will be right back with Sue Reardon. She's the co-founder of a company called Suite Spotte. This is Doris Nagel, and you're listening to the Savvy Entrepreneur Show. We are back chatting with Sue Reardon, who's the co-founder and community connector at a company called Suite Spotte LLC, Suite, Suite Spotte. And she's joined us this week to talk about the story of how she started and built her business. Continuing with the story of how the company got founded, I mean, there's a lot of practical questions like, where should we hold this, and do we rent or do we buy, and how do we find the cash to do it? I'm curious about the journey of how you actually made this actually happen.
Well, to start with, business coach, I believe in putting together a business plan, not a big binder that you end up putting on your shelf, but really doing some investigation on your idea and what will work, and really formulating the plan for how you're going to do it. My husband and I own a building in LaGrange, and we had a second floor loft that we lived in right on Main Street, and we became empty nesters. So it was like this space was, what a great opportunity. I owned a space that we could convert into a co-working space. So, a lot of things were coming into place. So I had the business plan. I needed to go out and get some feedback on the business plan. I went and talked with a colleague of mine who was a very successful entrepreneur. And we sat down and I was looking for feedback, poke holes in it, which he's fantastic at poking holes for sure. So I knew he'd be honest with me. And we sat down and we went through the plan, and he wrote his notes and asked questions and delved into it. Well, this gentleman was also connected with investors, angel investors. So I saw it as an opportunity for funding to be able to, he could help me to find some investors who might be willing to listen to what I had to say and what I was trying to achieve. And so we sat down and talked through it all, and I asked him, who do you know that might be willing to sit down and go through this? And he said, me. I'm investing in it.
Wow.
So, that doesn't happen every day. That does not happen. Again, you know what? I've had a lot of good things happen, but part of it is, I've had the benefit of meeting some and getting to know over the years some incredible entrepreneurs that have taught me so much. So, those relationships just appear when you need them somehow.
Wow.
It was great for that. So we decided to go forward with it.
That is fantastic. Let's pivot just a little bit and talk about the process of building the business and what it's meant for you. You've been an employee before. What do you think the biggest differences are for those who might have ideas and are listening to you and maybe are inspired to think about starting their own business? What do you think the biggest differences are between being an employee and being the CEO of a business, even if it's a little business?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that for me, and what I've seen most businesses able to do is they can be far more innovative, and they're more nimble when they own their business. They can incorporate their own values into how the business moves forward. They can play to their strengths and bring others in. The whole idea of creating something that you truly believe in. And, it's not always that easy to have that feeling of value and making a difference when you work for a large corporation as an employee.
That's for sure.
Yeah. And that gives you the energy. That gives you the drive, the motivation to make this work, to make it happen, and do what you need to do to make that happen.
Would you say that's the best thing about having your own business for you?
I think it's freedom. I think so. I think it's constantly learning and being to execute on ideas. You said in the beginning when you were introducing me, I'm a change addict. So I need to move,
Well, and I was going to say, as I was listening to that, having worked for for a while for big organizations that people who are agents of change are often not very happy in big organizations. Big organizations desperately need those agents of change, but they don't know how to accommodate them very well. And after a while, those change agents, if they're like me, they get tired of banging their heads on the wall. It's very frustrating being a square peg in a round hole. And at some point, you just say, yeah, I don't know if that's my life's work. Thank you.
And you are so right. Doris, there's so many resources out there to help somebody to get started. There really are. And there's so many people. One of the smartest things I did was to establish an advisory board that, went through my business plan that, kind of like the hot seat I was talking about before, except this is a little more extended hot seat. They felt goals. You got to be open to people questioning or coming up with other ideas. Otherwise, you're stuck. You're in a rut and you're not going to be able to adjust and change as you need to and pivot, as they call it today.
Mm-hmm. What's been the hardest thing about having your own business, do you think?
I think for me, starting the business, it had a longer ramp up than I had anticipated, mainly because I underestimated that 15-mile difference between downtown LaGrange and downtown Chicago may have well as been a whole new country because people in the city already knew about co-working. There were several co-working businesses there. People in the suburbs didn't have a clue. They couldn't figure out what I was doing. So there was a lot of time explaining, I can't tell you how many times you're doing co-what? And it was like, wow, people don't get this. So, interestingly enough, I probably had either educated or had a bias when I selected my advisory board even of people that got it. They knew what it was. So I think you really have to, for me, it was, I should have spent more time seeking out to really know, how do people see this?
So you're saying you wish you'd done maybe a little more market research to
absolutely
understand what the demand was and
Absolutely. I mean, I had the vision. I knew what I wanted. I knew that my co-working business was going to be based on people growing. It was all about helping people to grow. Everything I do is about that in my career. So I knew I wanted to do that. So the member community side of it was clear to me. I knew I had to have the office space, but I wanted to have that other piece and to be able to really broaden that side of the business. But that all takes time.
Yeah. It's very hard when you have a business that you're building into what I would call a nascent need, right? It's one where you're sure they need it. You know that if you could sit down with them and talk to them and gather enough data that they would understand that they really do need it. But trying to build that awareness into a need that people don't know they need is often a long runway.
It is. And I've often said this, and it's so true. People come to Suite Spotte for the space because they know they have to get out of their house, but they stay for the community.
That is great. What resources along the way have been particularly helpful? You mentioned your board of advisors. Maybe talk a little bit about them and how you decided to create that and how you went about deciding who would be a good advisor.
Well, I was looking for people that had, first of all, an understanding of what my prospective clients would be, my prospective members, and were open and had shown in the past to have an innovative approach to what they did. So I'm looking for creative people, not creative in artists, but creative in the sense that, they always see the possibilities. A couple were former clients. One was involved in association work with other organizations like chambers and such. Another was a individual that was a consultant on the retail side, and just to get an idea of what some of the other thoughts were. My business partner, he was involved with cabinet making and construction. So that whole facility piece of it and investment in that side of it and understanding what I was getting into and how much to roll into what that investment would really look like from a physical space so it was really drawing upon a lot of different ideas, pulled together meetups to talk with people about co-working and getting their thoughts on what was important. One of the meetups we did just before we opened LaGrange, I had 5 signed up members before I opened my doors.
Wow.
So
that's helpful.
Yeah, and you have to kind of look at that way. You have to begin to build it before, you open your doors or before you launch.
So it's not build it and they will come. It's make sure they come and then you build it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I think a lot of people do get caught up and they build it, they will come.
Oh, yeah.
Whoops.
So, every entrepreneur, every small business person that I've ever met at least hits a rough patch or two along the way. What do you do when you hit a rough patch? Where do you find inspiration?
My members. I have to unequivocally say my members. There's a core group of members that I can sit down with and talk to about what I'm trying to achieve, what's not working, what's going through, and they become my advisory board again and help me through it. There's so much energy with these people, and they're so supportive and so helpful and smart. They're just smart people that always picks me up. I mean, that's my joy. These people always have great ideas or a kind word or a supportive word. And that's what we do for each other all the time. And that means we call it ROI, the old ROI, but it's return on inspiration.
Wow. You really have created a community.
It's cool.
So that's an amazing thing and inspiring. You mentioned now that you've got 2 locations, your original location, and then I think you said you had one in Forest Park.
Right.
Is that part of the plan to grow to more locations? I mean, what's your longer term business plan look like for Suite Spotte?
The original business plan that we put together was based on having 3 locations. And, I look at business plans as living documents. So they change and move as you grow and learn.
Absolutely.
So I really looked at that and said, all right, if we're doing this whole community, if that's really where the true value of Suite Spotte, we don't necessarily need the space to bring on members. So we're expanding, or soon to be expanding, and that was in the plan for 2020. Instead of opening another physical location, what we will do is expand the membership community so that people can join and be a part, and essentially they're joining the community, but also will have, depending upon their membership, they will have access to meeting rooms and things like that. So it's not all finalized yet. So
that's a bit different revenue model,
yeah,
and a bit different in terms of what the offering might look like too.
Exactly.
Interesting. Yeah. So where do you see the business being in 3 to 5 years, ideally?
Ideally, that we have that community up and running, that we have people, that doesn't require a geographic boundary at all, that people, similarly minded people that are growing and learning and inspiring one another, the whole virtual aspect, that we have that nailed, that they feel as connected as if they were within the same room with people.
Wow,
And
if you
be
can
able to do
accomplish that, your revenue and potential clients is almost unlimited.
reach for the stars, right, Doris?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And when we set the plan in place, originally, I had an exit strategy. And the exit strategy, I think you have to have when you begin to, it's one of the important elements of thinking about a business, because I think it guides your decisions as you go forward. So I was building to sell. We are building to sell. This is not a legacy business for me. This isn't something I'm passing on to my sons who would really have no interest in it anyway. But it's something that, someone else can take on and take it to the next level.
No, but it's not a lifestyle business either. So
No. So it's something that, it gives me joy.
Right.
It's financially, you can in this business make money. So it's financially rewarding, but it also plays to my strengths.
Right.
And it gives me joy. And, if you're playing to your strengths, you get joy out of it for sure.
Absolutely. Talk a little bit before we wrap up about your book and the insights you might give to other people who are thinking about starting a business.
Sure. I had, as I mentioned earlier, I was very frustrated that micro businesses just weren't getting anywhere to where they could be. So few of them were. Some of them had to give up their businesses because financially they just couldn't support their families or whatever. And I think we see that a lot. I think that they don't have access to funding like the larger small businesses, if you will, have. And I think that's really frustrating. But part of that is because they also don't have a community that they can access that will give them honest feedback, that will help them to grow, that will collaborate with them. And I'm not talking financially. I'm talking just to draw upon, to get the energy, to get the resources together. It works. So this book was really to encourage these micropreneurs. Why it's a manifesto for the gutsy micropreneur is really about, hey, if you want to get ahead, there's some things you have to do. And one is play to your strengths, because, your strengths, if you are playing to them, as I just mentioned with myself, it makes you unstoppable. You move forward because you can do it. You have the confidence to go forward, and you bring others in. So collaboration is tantamount to opportunity. Collaboration is about bringing together different people who are going after the same thing. So working independently, but working collectively. It's about fear is fuel.
Yeah.
I think we get frozen. I think we just freak out. And I think sometimes you just have to tap into that, turn it around, and make that the energy for you to go forward. And most of the time, the fear that we have is, as you know, Doris, is founded on things we make up in our head.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because given the pandemic that's going on as we're recording this, I really see two different, there are lots of ways people are responding, but I kind of see almost two divergent approaches. And there are some that used to email me all the time, and now they've gone quiet. It's like they're just hunkering down, waiting for the storm to pass, and then hoping something's going to be there for them. And then there's others that I see that have just kind of gone on the offensive. And, I just kind of thought, well, that's a metaphor for the kind of thing that you're talking about, which is you can either be ruled by fear and be frozen, or you can go out swinging, and you may swing and swing
and miss
and miss, but at least you've got out swinging, right?
Yeah, and there are people that may not have done exactly what you want to do, but when somebody calls you, Doris, for advice, isn't that the most wonderful thing? And
It
don't you
is.
always respond?
It is wonderful.
So people just have to ask
Yeah.
others, not asking for, write my business plan, but asking questions. What do you think? What would you do? Or who do you know?
Right.
And I think that we don't take advantage of that some people that are trying to grow their businesses are afraid they'll get found out, that they don't know.
The imposter syndrome, right?
Exactly. So I think that makes a big difference. But this whole idea of fear, and how, as it relates to any type of a crisis or a change that's impacting a lot of people, or even individually in your life. Mark Ackerley, Mark is the managing partner for Sigma Resources, and he is just a truly smart man. And he's also a member of Suite Spotte. So I've got some really cool people that are in there. Well, Mark has put a spot on learning session that he did for our members. And it is about that. It's about resilience. It's about, what you need to do and how you need to shift your mindset when you're in the middle of a crisis, because it will end. And where will you be?
Right. All right. So the book is called Rock a Million, a manifesto for the gutsy micropreneur. Is it on your website or on Amazon? Where would people find it if they're looking for it?
On Amazon. On Amazon.
And to let people know, too, how to reach you if they're interested either in learning more or maybe being a member of one of your Suite Spotte communities, or maybe just to chat with you about to do the kinds of things you've been encouraging, which is to collaborate and ask for advice. What's the best way for them to reach you?
I would think through email is probably the most direct way. So they can email me at sue@suitespot.com. So it's SUITESPOTTE.com.
Fantastic. Sue, I want to thank you again for being with us today and for sharing your story. It was great having you.
Thank you, Doris. It was a pleasure. And what you're doing, I so admire. This is what helps people to move forward. And I appreciate you for doing that.
Wow, that feels good to hear. Thank you, Sue.
Sure.
So before we wrap up today's show, we have just enough time to answer a question from one of our listeners. Alex asks about sweat equity and whether there are things he should consider before handing it out. Alex and his brother are co-founders of a company, and they're each contributing, let's say, $50,000 to their new business called Capital Contributions. They have a third partner, though, who's really talented as a software engineer, but he doesn't have a whole lot of money, and he's going to contribute a proprietary idea and a lot of the basic coding that they need to make the company's new app a big success. They've all agreed that the value of what the software engineer is planning to contribute will be worth at least $50,000. So their plan is to give each of them 1/3 of the shares of the new company. Is there any reason you might want to think hard before doing this? Well, unfortunately, there are tax issues that really you need to think through. The IRS views this rather differently than most entrepreneurs do. The way the IRS looks at this is they say, basically, this is two separate transactions. The software engineer partner needs to bill the company for his, say, $50,000 in services, and, by the way, needs to demonstrate that that is truly a reasonable value for the services. Then he has to pay taxes on this income. Okay, you're going to say, well, he never got anything for it. No, but the IRS views this as a taxable transaction, and it's why, and a lot of times with startups, we call this phantom income, because he never sees it. So that's not a good outcome. That's not good for the software engineer. That's not what he wants to hear. It's not what his partners want to hear either. So what should they do instead? Well, there are some options to get around this or minimize the impact, and one of the things that startups often do is to loan the $50,000 to the software engineer. And by the way, we're assuming that this company is a corporation, not a partnership. And often these loans are structured with deferred payments, sometimes deferred repeatedly, indefinitely. I'm hoping to have somebody on the show in the near future to talk about all the various tax issues related to sweat equity and some of the options. But for now, just know this is a complicated topic. There are lots of tax and legal issues for the unwary. And so if you're considering giving someone equity in exchange for sweat equity, just know that there are issues you really need to think through and that you should find somebody who's experienced in the area to help you flag those issues and try to mitigate them. And I would encourage you to take care of these issues as early as possible. So if this is something your company has already done, the sooner you address it, the better. It's an issue when it comes to sweat equity. Make sure you document it well, because it often ends up being a source of hard feelings between the owners. You definitely don't want an IRS audit, and you don't want a problem that maybe is small when your company's not very valuable and not making much or any money. It can become a very expensive issue later on when the company is worth a bunch of money, and you don't want to be trying to clean it up when you're ready for angel investors or venture capital. That is our show for today. Thank you very much to all of our listeners for tuning in. And again, to our guest today, Sue Reardon, co-founder and community connector at Suite Spotte LLC. Now, I'll be doing an on-demand podcast recording of today's show, and you can find that along with all sorts of other free information and resources for entrepreneurs on my show page, the Savvy Entrepreneur show page at lakesradio.org, or my consulting website, which is globalocityservices.com. Now, we'll have another great guest next week, so be sure to join us. But until then, I'm Doris Nagel, wishing you happy entrepreneuring.